they might come back years from now or months from now or weeks from now and want to work with you because they knew that what you already gave them was so valuable and helpful, and they're ready to take that next step. And I think that there's just something to be said for being helpful in that way, in that it really allows you to show up as an expert in your industry as the go-to person, and they're going to be more likely to consume more of your content and maybe your lower paid programs. And so I think it's a win-win all around. Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about how to use your podcast and the content that you're creating for your podcast as supplemental content for your business. So the easiest way to kind of say this is that we're going to talk about how to repurpose your content within your business and for clients and potential clients. And we did have an episode 15, where we talked about 14 different ways to repurpose your content. That is a great generalization of repurposing and utilizing one piece of podcast content to then be able to give that information out into a bunch of different ways. But this is a little different than that. And I want to dive into it because this is something that we've been talking with our clients about a lot lately. And I think it's such an underutilized strategy. So let's go ahead and get started with this. When I say that we're using our podcast as supplemental content for our business, one of the ways to do that is by using your podcast episodes to be able to take potential clients who have already reached out to you, who are considering working with you, and to be able to showcase your expertise or help them if they can't afford to work with you. So I am someone who believes wholeheartedly in giving and giving and giving. And then there is some type of law of attraction, reciprocation that happens as you're able to give to your audience. Now, that can be difficult, especially if you're someone who doesn't have a podcast. But if you have a podcast, it makes it so much easier to be able to answer those frequently asked questions that you get in your DMs or in your inbox and be able to offer support to your audience in that way. An example of this is I was talking to someone and his podcast was about the journeys of people who have near-death experiences and who have a life-changing moment. So it is either the near-death or the life-changing moment. My company does not handle storytelling podcasts. That's not something that we like to do. There's a lot that goes into the back end of storytelling podcasts, like creating a kind of like a story flow for the episode. You might end up changing the positioning of certain sections of the audio to allude to things that might happen in the future of the audio. Usually you're going to have music through the background. So there's a lot of different elements to that I just don't feel comfortable adding to my team or adding to our work in that regard. So we like to focus specifically on business owners and nonprofits who are using their podcast to generate leads or visibility for their businesses. That's where I like to focus. So the storytelling doesn't really line up with that. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to offer him my services. Also, he came into it saying, look, you're outside of my budget, but I figured we could just talk. I'm always happy to do that with someone because I understand. Like, believe me, I get it. You might not have the budget to be able to afford us, but you still enjoy chatting with me. You want to know what my thoughts are on something. And so I'm happy to direct you to free content that can support you. So we had maybe 10 minutes where I could answer any questions he had, maybe direct him to some resources. And I was able to do that so easily because of my podcast content. So he had asked the question, well, I'm looking to grow my audience. So I said, great. I have a podcast episode called 10 Ways to Strategically Grow Your Podcast Audience. It is the first episode of the Listener's Fleets podcast. So I sent that over to him because I knew it would be valuable and something that he could definitely use to grow his audience. He asked about guests and finding guests. So then I directed him to a podcast episode called Finding Quality Guests for Your Podcast, which was episode 13. I already have these things where I'm not spending time answering his questions during the call. I can jump through all his questions relatively quickly because I'm making a list of the episodes I want to send him. Then he had more questions about the tech side of podcasting. And I said, look, I don't have anything for that. And there's not really anything that I can do without a one-on-one session to really be able to show you how to do the tech side by yourself. But I do have a tech tip series that is about to come out on the podcast. So if you subscribe, you'll be able to get notified when those go live. Or I have a podcast launch workshop that also has a tech checklist. So you can go grab that. It is free. Here's the link as well. This made it so much easier for him to leave the conversation getting value, right? I was able to give him valuable information without also taking hours of my time to give him that valuable information. Another example, I had someone reach out to me in my DMs and say, hey, look, I'm struggling with this. I understand if you can't help me, I don't have money to pay you. But if you know where to direct me, then please, I would love that information. And of course, I sent him my workshop that I thought would be great for him, where he's at in his podcasting journey and would help him kind of get himself organized. And I was able to send him a podcast episode as well that accompanied that workshop really well. All free content. So this is a great strategy. It also allows you to show that you're not hiding things. You're not hiding things behind a paywall. And if someone can't afford you, it's not like you don't have enough time for them or their problems. Because when you create those relationships with people from a point of giving, they might come back years from now or months from now or weeks from now and want to work with you because they knew that what you already gave them was so valuable and helpful, and they're ready to take that next step. And I think that there's just something to be said for being helpful in that way, in that it really allows you to show up as an expert in your industry, as the go-to person, and they're going to be more likely to consume more of your content and maybe your lower paid programs. And so I think it's a win-win all around. All right, so another way to use your podcast as supplemental content in your business is as a free content roundup. This is something that I am working on behind the scenes for my website, aliciagalati.com. And I have a client who did this, and I love, love, love it so much that I am using this idea and creating something on my website that is similar to what she has. So at the top of her website, it says, I'm struggling with ... And then there's a drop down. And that drop down has all of the things that her potential client could be struggling with. For me, I plan on having something that says, I'm looking for support in, then the drop down would have topics like podcast content, podcast tools, podcast marketing, podcast monetization, and podcast launching. So those are the main things and the main topics that I can obviously discuss. Now, each of those drop downs is going to go to a page, and that page will have a free workshop that they can do that gets them on my email list. It's also going to have how they can pay for a one-on-one session to get support in that area. Then it's going to have how they can offload that and that struggle, whatever they're dealing with, to my team and myself to be able to get support full service. Then going down further, it's going to have 5 to 10 podcast episodes that cover that topic. So that way there's something for everyone, no matter if they're ready to work with us and they're ready to drop thousands of dollars, or if they are on the struggle bus and just need that added support. So when they come to our website, it is so easy for them to get that support that they need. And I'll be able to use my podcast to frame that as like, here are our top 5 episodes on that topic. And if you need free support, here you go. That way, they don't have to go to the Listeners Leads podcast on their podcast app and try to find the topic that they're looking for. It'll make it so much easier for them based on what they would like support in. Another way to use your podcast as supplemental content for your business is with your clients. Last week, we had Sam and Karen of Making Website Magic, and they talked about this strategy, and I love it so much. They use their podcast, and it is within their group program. So depending on the topic that they're discussing that week for their group program members, they also will have supplemental podcast episodes that maybe explain it a little different or go a little deeper or maybe touch on the mindset behind the topic. And I love this so much because the content's already created. They might have already listened to the podcast episode before they joined the group program, but most of the time your audience is going to need to hear something more than once in order to take action. And that goes for people who are paying to work with you as well. Most people are not going to just get it on the first try or get it on the first listen. They might not be ready to hear it when they hear that first podcast episode. So having it in an organized and structured way like that is just supplement. It's just extra. It is bonus for your audience, and it's organized so that they can easily take action, listen, and get that extra thing that they might need when they're dealing with this particular content. I love that strategy so much because your podcast is there for you to use. You don't have to just set it and forget it and let it just try to work itself out. Like, use your podcast to your advantage beyond just a content source. Now, the last way that you can use your podcast as supplemental content in your business is in coaching. Now, I have a client who is doing this, and I think I want to do like chef kiss all around for these last 2 because I think it's so important to use this. To use your podcast in a way that is working for you and isn't just sitting there collecting dust. So she uses it for her coaching. And yes, we just talked group programs and utilizing it in that way. Also, memberships are a great way, going back to clients and group programs. I think memberships are a great way to use your podcast as supplemental content, depending on the topics that you're discussing that month. So that's a side note. But going forward to the coaching side, this client, when she has someone book a session with her, she will have them fill out a form that informs her of what they need to work on during that session. But they only have a limited amount of time, usually an hour, to actually have the session. So sometimes there's pre-work that can be done before the actual live session even starts. In the case of this client, she is a productivity and time management coach. If her clients are coming to her and saying, hey, I am finding that I'm not really productive and I'm not sure why, and I'd love to talk about how I can be more productive, she might send them episodes on figuring out which productivity tools work best for you as an individual. And that way they can come to the conversation with some awareness about themselves, about what might work for them. And that way it makes the conversation way more streamlined. So then they can focus on more during that paid time than if they were to try to cover all of those different things and get to the root during that time. And I think that is such a great strategy and way to use your podcast as supplemental content for your business. So those are the 4 ways that I see people use them. I love it. If you are using your podcast as supplemental content for your business beyond just repurposing it in different ways or any of the 4 that we talked about, I would love to know so we can share it with our listeners. So send me a DM. Let me know how you're using your podcast content as something extra or bonus within your business. All right, have a fantastic week, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.